Actually, it's about the same as last year, but it's very close to what it was last year.
In the combination of your budgets for the nursing home, what has that accomplished for you? I know that was a priority for you last year. How did that help you?
I'm sorry, could you?
The combination of your nursing home budgets
Yes.
that you wanted last year, how has that helped you? What's that accomplished for you?
Oh, okay. Well, it's given us some fluidity in terms of if we've got a problem at one home, we can move money from the other home into the home where we have the problem. So far, we really haven't had to do that yet, but that flexibility is there, and it's definitely something that we're going to be able to take advantage of.
If you could please, at your convenience, not right now, give me a precise number of the beds utilized at each new
Sure.
nursing home.
Be happy to.
I'm going to go down the row. Representative Benton.
Madam Chair, whichever one can answer the question. Last year, y'all asked for some additional money for cemetery maintenance, and I wanted to find out if that had worked out for you, and I also wanted to find out if y'all were the ones that were in charge of maintenance of the Confederate cemeteries.
Okay, in answer to your first question, we asked for funding for 2 additional people at the cemetery in Milledgeville and 1 additional person for the cemetery in Glenville.
Okay.
All 3 of those positions have been hired. They are now on board.
Okay.
And we operate those cemeteries directly as a state agency.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more question. Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's pretty simple. Looking at some of the services license plates, it's my understanding that we've got one of the most restrictive requirements to get a disabled veteran license plate in the country. Are you aware of that, and is there anything that we ought to be doing about that?
To be honest with you, I have not looked at the requirements that some of the other states have done. What we have done, we worked out with the Division of Motor Vehicles the creation of a plate that was not originally on the legislation to allow anyone who is a veteran, shows up with a DD Form 214 and can show where they had service, or if they have service in the Guard or the Reserve and have proof of that, the Division of Motor Vehicles will issue a plate, and it just says veteran on the bottom of it. So that opened up a door that I think probably was kind of closed for some people who had not received either a retirement status or received recognition in the form of some kind of a medal, such as the Purple Heart or Bronze Star or whatever the medal might have been. There's a whole list of them in that legislation.
Well, specifically on the disabled veterans, it's my understanding we require a 100% disability rating from the VA?
That is correct, yes.
Does that not seem a little extreme? I mean, a 100% disability rating is somebody that's really non-functional.
Well, actually, the definition of 100% disability from the VA does not necessarily mean that the person is incapacitated. In fact, sitting in the audience right here on the end is Rick Graham, who's our Director of Operations, who, by the way, is retiring at the end of this month. He's 100% disabled with the VA. He drives one of them big Toyota Tundra trucks, and I've ridden with him, and he can handle that thing extremely well, and he has a DV plate on the back of it. So there are a lot of veterans who are disabled in terms of the way the VA categorizes disability and percentages, but they're still able to function, get around, and mobilize and be mobile around wherever they need to be.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner, I can validate that because I have a brother, veteran, who I think you know about, and he's deaf, and he has asbestosis. But you look at him, and you would never know that he had lung disease. But he gets, 100%, but he's still functioning. But I have had complaints about that also from constituents. Okay. Representative Benton, did you have another question? And that was it. Okay. Any other questions, anyone? Thank you so much. The only thing I had was, we had several senators that have participated in your ceremonies, and it's just been absolutely wonderful. They loved it. They talked about it. They put it on Google Groups. And the only question we had was, we don't get enough notice to know when you're going to have it to be able to participate because our schedules, if we could get it sooner, we would have more participation, and we would love to have more senators
We'll
go.
make sure, man. We'll work on that.
Okay.
Let me just say, as the proponent within the department, if you become aware of an organization in your district that is wanting to put one of these on, please, at your level, share with them the need to get in touch with us as soon as
Okay.
possible. And that way we can work it from our end as well as from your end and try and
Okay.
meet that scheduling
And
requirement.
the rep said the same thing. So
Absolutely,
we don't need to
yeah.
put that language in the budget.
Thank you.
Okay.
But we are trying to,
Yeah.
to speed that process
Yeah.
as quickly as we can and to give as much notice as we can. But
Right.
the issue goes back to the organizations that
The
are actually
locals.
hosting these
Right.
ceremonies. So
Right. It's great. I mean, we had senators that were literally in tears, that they were just so impressed with the families and how many people come to those things. It's just amazing.
we've had hundreds at the ceremonies. Given the number of certificates that we've presented, almost 8,000 so far, you can probably take that number and, multiply it by 10 times that.
Yeah.
Because of families and friends.
That's what
and
the
have
senators
you.
have said. It's a great program. It's well worth the money. Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman, let me just make one comment to the representative. The VA is looking at lowering that percentage from 100. Okay, they are, and look at that. Again, ma'am, I want to thank you for your support of all Georgia's veterans. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, we had one more to light up. We should have quit talking. Representative Taylor?
Yes, Commissioner. Just for the benefit of folks who don't know what the ceremony or the program is, could you enlighten some of the folks here? How to get that through the VFW or your local American Legion or Post or a Rotary? Could you just kind of explain in
How
a
do you
minute
do it?
how do you do that and what
Do we
that
write a
program
letter to
entails?
them? I guess the question is, how do you implement it?
We have gone out to all of the veteran service organizations statewide, and we have asked them to push that information down to their local posts and to encourage the local post commanders and chapter presidents, depending on how the organization is set up, to participate in this program and to get in touch with our department to arrange for ceremonies. Probably most of you know, if you've got a Legion post or a VFW or a DAV in your district, those folks are the ones that ultimately have got to make the call. We're also dealing with some churches around the state. So that's another avenue that is open, and we're trying to take advantage of. So,
And can you explain just in 10 or 15 seconds what this program entails, just so the folks that don't know and hear the certificate and the pen and all that?
basically what it is it's the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. Started back in 2012 nationally, and it will run until 2025. So it's going to run the entire period of time that most people normally think of as when the Vietnam War occurred. The program that we have at the state level mirrors the criteria that the Department of Defense put together, which is anyone who served during the period of time from 1955 to 1975. And the reason those dates were selected is when Dien Bien Phu collapsed under the French. We had advisors, military advisors on the ground in Vietnam at that time. So that's the reason the 1955 date was picked. 1975, that's the date that Saigon fell. And so that's how the dates work. So anyone who served on active duty in the armed forces, in the Guard, in the Reserve, during that period of time is eligible to receive one of our certificates and a DoD lapel pin, which I have one on here. All that has to be done is we can issue them individually, and we have had several of those ceremonies where we have had, I guess, probably about 35 or 40 people who've come up to our office in the Twin Towers, and we've had individual ceremonies and presented them. So individuals can do that on their own by contacting our department directly, 404-656-2300, or going through a local post, chapter, church, and say, hey, can we get a ceremony down here? One of the interesting things down in Savannah, we started off with one small ceremony, and we've had 3 more just as a result of word of mouth. And suddenly we'd get a phone call, hey, I heard you're doing this thing. What do we got to do to participate? We got about 45 people we'd like to recognize. So that's how it just kind of multiplies that way.
Thanks so much.
I think if I could just add, from talking to the senators, one of the premises of the program is that when these folks came home back to the United States, that they were not welcomed with open arms. And this is our way of thanking them once again in a more civil manner. So I think that's why it's so emotional, and it really
Absolutely.
late in life, and it's a good thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. With that, I think we're going to go on into voc rehab. Is that what you have?
That's it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
We do have that on PowerPoint. If you don't mind, we'd like to load that on the computer, if that's okay, Senator.
Okay. Here they go, PowerPoint. It's above my pay grade.
Great, thank you very much, Chair. I think you just hit the end up button. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Senator Otterman, Madam Chair, Representative Dempsey, members of the committee. My name is Greg Schmeig. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and it's my pleasure to present to you this afternoon. Before I begin with my presentation, though, I have to say that it's wonderful to hear about what they're doing for Vietnam vets. Jimmy and I are both Vietnam vets that don't belong to a VFW or a Rotary Club, and so it's nice to know that we can contact them and maybe we'll get our little lapel pin. But I think you're right. My memory of coming back was not a good one, so I think what we're doing is a great thing for our veterans. This is the 4th time I've presented to this committee, and because our proposed changes for Amendment 16 are very brief, with your permission, I'd like to share with you an update about our agency, if that's okay, and I promise I will stay within my time limit. I first want to thank this body for the bill that actually created GVRA, and whether you voted for it or you voted against it, I know that you did so to represent the constituents in your district that are citizens with disabilities. And so I think it's time for us to give you a little update of where we're at today versus where we were. And as you see on the title slide there at the bottom, it lists the various programs that provide the services to our citizens with disabilities. But if you turn to page 2, and I always like to include our mission. Our mission as an agency is employment and independence for citizens with disabilities in our state. And most of us know that getting a job and having a career is really the vehicle that gives us our independence. It opens the doors of opportunity that lets people with disabilities access everything that you and I can access. I don't view our agency as a social service agency. I really view it as an economic driver. We are taking people and putting them to work and making them taxpayers. This is where we were on July 1, 2012, when we went into existence. We had a $20 million deficit in our state vocational rehab program. In that program, all of our priority categories were closed. We had 10,777 people on a waiting list. We had minimal agency infrastructure. We had a small reserve at Georgia Industries for the Blind. Our disability adjudication service had a poor relationship with our federal partner, the Social Security Administration, and the hospitals at Warm Springs were running a deficit. Below that is where we're at today. Our agency infrastructure is 95% in place. The last piece of that is our IT, which will be finished by July 1, 2016. And I have to say, just right off the outset, I want to thank Commissioner Crittenden for her support as Commissioner of DHS. As you all know, we're administratively attached to DHS, and DHS has really been just a superb partner through our growth, and I really do appreciate that, Commissioner. We transferred the hospitals at Warm Springs to Georgia Regents University under the Board of Regents on July 1, 2014, and that included the licenses, the physical property the hospitals sit on at Warm Springs, and the 180 employees that worked at the hospitals. Now our Disability Adjudication Service has a very collaborative relationship with our federal partner, Social Security Administration, and it has become one of the highest performing DASs in the Southeast. We now have a substantial reserve at Georgia Industries for the Blind, which will allow us to do some capital infusion for new product lines that hopefully will lead to more employment for individuals who are visually impaired or blind. We have restructured our VR program. All of our priority categories are open. We have no waiting list at all. We currently have a formal memorandum of understanding with Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, thanks to Commissioner Berry and his team. We do a blended funding model on both the behavioral health side and the developmentally disabled side. In fact, this year on the behavioral health side, we have moved, I think, 500 individuals with severe and persistent mental illness into supported employment using their providers. We instituted a constituent services unit and a disability liaison to help resolve consumer concerns or customer concerns and advocacy issues. We're currently doing a pilot with the Department of Juvenile Justice on incarcerated youth with disabilities transitioning out of a YDC. We have partnerships with most, if not all, of the post-secondary inclusion programs in our state, including certainly Kennesaw State and Columbus State. Kennesaw State was the first, and they are really leading the way in that. We have a strategic partnership with the Division of Workforce Development, and recently they received a Disability Employment Initiative grant to serve 2 areas of our state that we are their partner on. And October 1st, we were one of 4 states in the country to receive a federal Career Pathways grant as a 5-year demonstration grant to serve youth with disabilities, both in and out of school, and students with disabilities, in particular middle school and high school students, providing them access to a path that leads to real jobs in their community. We've recently created a business division to focus all of our agency efforts on employers for gaining business and employment. And we have eliminated that $20 million deficit, and we have been on budget every year since the first year, actually including the first year. Now, the credit for all of where we're at today doesn't go to me, it goes to all the staff, and we have a great group of wonderful staff. We have very good, wonderful providers, and we have very good strategic partners. So I want you to know that whether you voted for the bill or whether you voted against it, I think our agency is in good shape and we're progressing forward. Turn to the next page, and you can also find this on pages 42 and 43 of the tracking sheet. And as I mentioned, there's really very minimal changes for amended state fiscal 16. And as you see on the left there in the first column, we have all of our programs listed with their tracking number. Our business enterprise program, and just to familiarize you with the template that I'm showing, the first column next to the program is the state funds in our current FY16 budget. Then the column next to that to the right is the proposed change in state funds, if any. And then you'll see the total for the amended 16 budget, that's state funds only. And then the final column is the total budget for that particular program, all sources of funding, state, federal, and other. And we really only have 2 proposed program changes. The first one is in the agency departmental admin. Tracking number 28.23.1 is the statewide increase in TeamWorks, $2,411. And then the other one, tracking number 28.23.2, is a savings that will be transferred out of agency admin into VR of $34,971 to serve more people. And that really, contract savings, I'll just elaborate a little bit on that. When we began as an agency, because the law was signed in April and we were going live July, the Department of Labor actually provided all of our IT support. In the first year we were in existence, that IT support cost us $10.4 million. Last year it's down to 3.6, and so all of the savings in those particular types of contracts have been reinvested into services for those we're supposed to be serving. Then you see our disability adjudication services, 100% federally funded. Georgia Industries for the Blind, no state or federal funding. What they earn is really what they earn through their work, their businesses. And then under VR, tracking number 28.26.1 is really the reverse of that 34,000 coming into the VR program out of agency admin. And then finally, you just see the Roosevelt Warm Springs hospitals, which is really just a pass-through, and again, no proposed changes in that for amended 16. So with that, I'll try to answer any questions anyone has.
Okay. Representative Benton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate you coming today.
Sure thing.
I've heard some concerns that services for the deaf and blind have gone down since y'all disbanded the sensory impairment unit. Y'all have any plans to bring that back?
It's a good question, sir. And actually what we looked at, when we looked at the data over the last 20 years, we actually saw that they served more people in 1994 than they did in 2014. We didn't really disband the deaf or the sensory unit. What we did, our blind unit, what we did is we created subject matter experts. We still have deaf counselors, we still have blind counselors, but our goal is really to serve that as a population that's been underserved and to really increase the services there. So we do have plans to increase services for that population.
Thank you.
Good question, thank you.
Representative Oliver, did you turn your light on? Thank you.
The elimination of a waiting list is amazing to me, because you had
10,700.
I was going to say 10,000 people on it last year. In addition to, I've heard concerns about the sensory crowd too, but how many of those 10,000 people are kind of in process for evaluation? Because that, under your prior problems, which is amazing, the progress you've made, it seems like that was a glut too, that they were in your system, but they weren't moving through it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I sure can. I appreciate the question, Representative Oliver. The 10,777 people, the way we decided to address it, and I have to give Ed James, who's our VR director, really the credit for this. We actually, the task was, how do you re-engage all of those people as quickly as possible to see, number one, if they're still interested in services, and then number two, by our federal statute, we have to engage them in a face-to-face appointment. So how do you get them scheduled for appointments? And so really, Ed James took the lead in this, and what we did is we engaged two of our providers, the Center for the Visually Impaired and the Bobby Dodd Institute, who operated call centers. They created a script. They called 3 times at different times during the day, each of those individuals using that script. At the same time, Ed asked every counselor across the state to free up 2 days a week that they could schedule appointments. So when one of those call center agents, either at the Center for the Visually Impaired or Bobby Dodd, could reach the person, the first question was, are you still interested in receiving services? 65% of the people we contacted were still interested. And at the same time they had them on the phone, they had the freedom to schedule them an appointment with one of our counselors in the field. So that's the first step. Now you've got the appointment scheduled. Now the next step is going through the appointment and creating the work plan. In all honesty, it took us about 6 months to move those people into service from the waiting list. So it was not just a flipping the switch, it was about a 6-month process. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you. Let's see. Senator Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question, it's just a comment, and I want to commend the agency, having watched it closely since 2011, 2012. The job y'all have done in serving this population is phenomenal.
Thanks, Senator.
You call 911, baby, you are on fire. You're doing a great job, and you've made incredible strides. And having watched it very, very closely, I'm excited to see what you're going to be doing in the future. When you talk about these federal dollars, bringing these federal dollars down, what can we do to bring down more federal funds? Would you expound on that just for a moment?
I will. Thank you, Senator Miller, number one, for your support and your questions as well. In the way that our grant works, a federal grant, we have a federal VR grant, and to our state, that's about $100 million. Georgia has, as far as back as we can trace, has never fully earned that full grant. And so every year we have had to send back money. 2 years ago, we sent back $40 million. Last year it was down to $20. Our gap has been about $8.5 million to match that grant. We have tried to close that, and I'll tell you some of the ways we've closed it. The agreement with DBHDD, they have given us, out of their state funds, about $800,000. We match that, but that also helps us serve the severe and persistent mentally ill or the significantly developmentally disabled. Last year, several of our providers, we thank them. They lobbied this body, and you added $900,000 to our budget this year, which we appreciate, into the VR program. It's how do we work smarter with the money that is already on the table. We've had conversations already with Commissioner Corbin on the technical college side. Could we get some of their state funds, because we send people to technical college, or the Board of Regents for four-year universities, to match some of their state money with our federal grant to create almost like a scholarship for a person with a disability to attend a technical college, because we know the placement rate out of a technical college is about 80%. If you graduate from a technical college, about 80% of you are guaranteed to get a job. So it's how do we have never gone to ask for more money. It's really about how do we use our money smarter and wiser. And then on the cost side, just quite honestly, and I give the staff all the credit, we in VR, for example, our personnel budget in VR was 53% of the budget. It's now at 39%. So we sat on vacancies. We didn't fill positions. At one point, they had 17 regional directors. We're now down to 4. So we want to be the agency that operates as an efficient government agency. But I appreciate the question. It's always good to see you, Senator Miller. Thank you.
Any other questions? I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Department of Human Services and DFACS. And if anyone is in the room and if you're staying here for DBHDD or for the Office of the Child Advocate, they are not testifying today. So if you're interested in those, I don't want you to have to hang around and anticipate them, because they're not going to be testifying. So with that, Commissioner, thank you. Appreciate you coming over today.
Thank you.
Do you have a PowerPoint?
No, we'll be working from the tracking sheet.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Dempsey, I'm going to turn it over to you and let the Commissioner start, and I'll be right back.
When you're ready. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today with Director Bobby Cagle to present the DHS and DFACS amended FY16 budgets. And we're going to follow the tracking sheet in our discussion. We'll be starting with page 40 of 75.
Chairman Underwood, Chairman Dempsey, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My presentation will be rather short, but glad to answer any questions that you might have. I'll direct your attention to page 41 at section 28.15. At 28.15.1, you'll see an increase in out-of-home care utilization. That's projected at $51.482 million. You'll also see that the total funds there is $64.35 million, reflecting a $12.9 million federal drawdown on that. At 28.15.2, replacing prior year TANF assistance for needy families, and that will cover the cost of the remainder of the fiscal year for out-of-home care. October of 2015 to June of 2016, and that reflects the period of time when we don't have excess TANF funds to cover that. That's all in terms of federal funds in the amount of actually replacing federal funds in the amount of $34,483,285. At the program net there, you'll see $85.965 million in terms of state funds, total funds in $64.352 million. That difference is reflected in a transfer between two line items between out-of-home care and child welfare services. Glad to answer any questions that you might have at this point.
Representative Oliver.
Thank you. The TANF discussion's been going on 10 years now. It's going to end. They're not going to allow it. It shouldn't be allowed. Would you give me an update on what the federal response is to transfer of TANF funds right now, if there is anything new on that arena?
Yes, thank you, Representative Oliver. The TANF discussion at the federal level is probably the least acrimonious of any point in time that I've studied it. There is pretty much bipartisan agreement that TANF will change in nature entirely to be a work program, and there is a distinct possibility that those changes could severely impact the budget of the Division of Family and Children Services. Part of what you see here is transferring TANF funds from out-of-home care budget into our child welfare services budget, and also reducing the expenditure by the amount that we had left. I think that was around $34 million that the TANF ran out this current fiscal year during September of 2015. So what this actually does for us in terms of TANF is puts us on a better footing than we have been on in many, many years. At one point, we were spending 68% of our child welfare budget was TANF funds. This will help us actually replace some of that with our state funds, which will put us on a better footing should those changes at the federal level take place. At this point in time, given what we know about the calendar of the Congress, it appears as though that may not move this session, but there is pretty much bipartisan agreement on the changes that should take place, and we look for that in the next session of the Congress.
So it's FY18?
FY18 at the federal fiscal year at the earliest in our estimation.
And our budget would be FY18 too then?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot. Hang on. Representative Benton. And just for y'all's information, we do not have the tracking sheets. Most of us, I'm looking around the room, we have our big budget, but we're trying to keep up with you on it.
Absolutely. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Glad to have you with us today. You're dressing pretty sharp.
Thank you very much.
Question's not with the budget, but it has to do with service. In the last couple of months, I've gotten 6 or 7 phone calls from people that can't get through. They call the number, they get an answer machine, and nobody calls back. They call a different number and nobody answers. And it's even calling the number here in Atlanta. And eventually they get around to calling me and say, I need your help on getting some information. And I know that y'all are busy, and I know that what y'all do is tough, but when people call and leave a message, they ought to get a call back. And whether it's here in Atlanta or whether it's in Jackson County or Banks County, they need to get a call back, or somebody needs to answer the phone.
Absolutely. I would agree with you entirely. Customer service is something that we are working on. Not in a way of an excuse, but to give you an idea of what may be to account for part of that, is that we've gone through a transition from a call center-based operation for our economic services programs like food stamps, where we have about 1.8 million Georgians that access those programs annually. We had a situation there when I came to this job 20 months ago where we were only timely with our service in that area at about 66% of the time. We, I'm very happy to say, are timely at a rate of about 94% of the time as of the end of December. That is also reflected in the number of complaints that we receive. We've seen those drop considerably. But in my estimation, as long as we have one person that's not getting the service as you describe, it's not acceptable. So I make myself available to you, and I will certainly attend to those things if you will give me the information on it, and I will see to that.
Well, once I call or have my assistant call Ms. Fielding, it gets handled.
Yes, sir.
But the average citizen doesn't know that they can call their state representative or state senator and get some help. And so a lot of cases they're just frustrated, and it's all been with the DFAX numbers.
Yes, sir.
So.
Absolutely. And another aspect of this problem is that as we went through the recession, this department took large cuts like every other department in state government in an effort to make sure that we were putting the people in mission critical positions. We moved to do away with many of our administrative clerical positions in counties and in state office. At this point in time, we've really not added any of those back because we've needed to add to the frontline caseworkers that actually see to the safety of children, to the people that do the eligibility determinations. We have not yet made any kind of request for additional administrative personnel, but we are trying to make customer service a top priority. We're training in that area, and certainly if you'll let me know where those problems are taking place, I will attend to those as best I can.
All right. Representative Taylor?
Thank you. Got a couple questions. What is the per diem rate for foster children, and then is it different for children with special needs in foster care?
This is your base foster care.
Mm-hmm.
This is your CCIs, these top three. Okay. This is the amount that the agencies get for the foster care on top of that.
So the base foster care rates are based upon age. Per diem daily rate, for instance, for a birth through age 5 child is $15.04 a day. 6 through 12, $17 a day. Age 13 and over is $19.36 per day. For those that are placed in family foster homes. For those that are placed in child placing agencies, those rates range from $22 up to $83, and that is based on the level of acuity behavioral problems. And then we also have specialized rates for children who have very difficult medical conditions and other things of that type that go above and beyond that.
And I guess my wife's been a CASA, my chief of staff is a CASA, so I'm dealt with this a little bit. But what is the average length of time that somebody spends in foster care? I mean, on a just generally, I know there's highs and lows, but
yes, sir. I don't have that figure with me. We'll get that for you, but I can tell you this: the requirements under federal and state law are that children move through as quickly as possible. Typically, no more than 24 months in care. We're not at that goal. The law also requires that if a child's been in care for 15 of the most recent 22 months, that we are to move to have the rights of the parent terminated. Many times when we have children that go over the 2-year period, over into 3 and 4 years, those are cases where we have actually presented to the court, had terminations of parental rights done, and those are on appeal to the State Court of Appeals. We have experienced in the recent past a number of those that are getting overturned, meaning that we have to go back and rework the entire case in order to prove that the parent has had ample opportunity to get their children back. We will get you the specific information on the average length of time for that as soon as possible.
And last question, I guess, what is the average profile, educational profile and salary, annual pay for your caseworkers? And what kind of turnover rate do those folks have on an annual basis?
Very good questions. The average social worker would have a bachelor's degree in social work. The starting pay for those range around $28,000. For a master's level social worker, that's around $32,000. And our turnover rate has been ranging between 30 and 36% annually, and is something that we're very concerned about, have been working diligently to try to bring down, most recently with a $5 million infusion of cash from the last budget, the current budget cycle, where we were able to give the first significant raises to caseworkers in many years. They range from 2.5% up to 7.5% based upon number of years of service as well as merit. And so those are things that we're very concerned about. Thank you for asking those questions.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Benton.
I had one other question. Was on a study committee this summer about kinship care, and I know that you were at one of the meetings here in Atlanta, and you heard the testimony as I did. The rate that grandparents or aunt or uncle that is trying to raise a brother's child or their grandchild or whatever, I think was said to be at $3 a day if they did not go through DFACS to be. Has there been any looking at helping that amount out, because those people are well, they're saving the state a pretty good chunk of change by trying to keep their families together, and with them not trying to go through the DFACS qualification, that says to me that they may be afraid that they won't qualify. Mm-hmm. Has anything been done to try to help those people that are trying to keep their families together? That maybe if there's one thing about the house or one thing about something about the family that maybe is not looked at as strongly as other things. Some of the testimony was quite compelling and quite emotional as to what these grandparents are doing. Do y'all have any plans to try to help these folks out?
As a matter of fact, I was speaking with Chairman Underman earlier about this very subject. The payments that you're referring to, the very low payments, are the TANF payments that are made for what we call child-only cases. So it's a grandparent or another relative caring for a relative's child that is not in the custody of the department. Very low rate. That rate has not changed since the inception of TANF in 1996. I think that is something that in the future we definitely need to look at. That is set by this body. So the TANF money is a perennial topic of interest. I think something that does need to be attended to. The struggle in the recent past has been that we have been still recovering from the budget crisis, and replacing state funds with TANF funds was one of the strategies that we used in order to be able to continue to provide services through the recession. And so we're now at a point where I think we can begin looking at those things. On the flip side of this, you have children who come into our care that are cared for by relatives. In my estimation, and in all the literature that you can look at, the very best thing for children is to be able to be cared for by a relative if they can't be cared for by their families, as long as they're able to protect them. And, you know, if you think about that in real terms, I think about my childhood. I always had pretty well secure knowledge that I would have gone to my aunts or uncles, I would have gone to my grandmother had my parents not been able to care for me. My charge to my staff has been that over the next 2 years, I want at least 50% of the children in foster care in relative placements, because I think it is better for the children. I also think it is better for the state budget. It is a lower cost alternative, but at that, we also need to look at the amounts of money that we pay families to be able to care for their children in lieu of them coming into a foster home or a higher level placement that can be very, very expensive.
So that would be an ask by your department, correct?
Yes, it would.
And can we pretty much take that on faith that you're gonna be asking for some more money for these folks in the next at least in the next budget year?
In FY17, there is a small amount of money, relatively small amount of money, $587,000 that will be devoted to what we call kinship navigators.
Yeah, I saw that in the budget. I saw the navigators there. That was something that that several of the groups that we went to, and we traveled over the state, that was one of the complaints that they had, that the navigators had gone away and people didn't know what to do.
Yes. And we were very pleased to see that in the budget. I can tell you that between now and the next budget cycle, we'll be engaged in a lot of conversation around the use of TANF funds, as well as the entire service array, including relatives, and that'll probably be a part of our next budget presentation for the FY18 cycle.
Thank you for your help on that.
Thank you.
Commissioner, could you go ahead and give us that TANF baseline, and if we wanted to improve it in 17 and add additional money to that other than the navigators, if you could get us that to get the per diem rate up, if you could get us that for 17 and let us look at it. And
absolutely, Madam Chairman, we'll be glad to do that. That should be gotten to you in short order.
Okay, thank you. Representative Oliver.
You're talking about the traditional the old school welfare grant. That's what you're talking about.
Yes, that is correct.
And that was set based on a antiquated formula of a poverty set of Georgia, and has always needed to be updated. Is that close to being accurate?
I've only been here 10 years, but in the 10 years that I've been in Georgia, that has been a low rate, and I would agree it probably needs to be looked at.
We lose a lot of federal money based on that. We lose a lot of 4A money based on that, and those discussions were set aside during the recession, but now it really is a good time, because if we can pull more 4E money down, we'll make that up.
That's right. You're right. If you could get those for us, even though we're working on 16, and have them before you come back for 17, that would help.
Yes.
Representative Kirby, I think, has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We kind of talked a little bit about caseworkers and service and everything. I keep hearing from caseworkers out in the district that we're understaffed. And to the point that they really got upset was when we do have 36% turnover, and somebody left, that opening wasn't filled there in their county. It got moved to some other county, so they're not even able to fill the openings, or a lost person when somebody leaves. How understaffed are we, and what do you need to get staffing right?
So the staffing proposal for FY17 adds another 175 caseworkers. If I remember correctly, if approved, that would bring us to 628 caseworkers over the last 3 fiscal years. The governor committed back in 2013 to increase by 525 caseworkers over this time period. What that is a reflection of is his recognition that the caseloads have grown tremendously since we implemented a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week call center, and it appears that is going to be sustained growth. As we look at the budget this year, the 175 staff keeps us moving in the right direction. He set a goal of being at one caseworker for 15 cases, which is roughly the national standard around caseworkers. We range in this state from the 1 to 15 to 116 range to areas where you have as many as 20, 25, 30 cases. And so what we do when a vacancy comes available is that we look at the areas around the state in the interest of child safety and place those positions where we have the highest caseloads so that we can bring the caseloads more in line on average across the state. That's part of what the employees are seeing. I think they're quite correct. We are understaffed still. We will probably need at least, if we continue the same caseload patterns, we'll need at least 400 more caseworkers and the complement of supervisors that goes with that in order to be able to be fully staffed. This is a problem that's developed over at least the last 10 years. It's taken us a while to get there, but I am very pleased with the progress that we're making and the money that's been put forward at this point. I think we will bring to, I think about $28 million the total investment if we approve this budget in additional staff over the last 3 fiscal years alone.
I was kind of adding those numbers up in my head, make sure I stay clear. So you're just saying you're a little bit over 60-some% staffed right now?
That's correct. We're running about, on average, a 1 to 19 caseload average. With the 175 staff in this upcoming budget, that'll bring us down to 1 to 18 on average. We're making incremental progress. It is taking a while to get there, absolutely.
Thank you.
And you can refresh my memory, the goal is 1 to 15?
1 to 15, that's correct.
Right. That's a commendable goal. Representative Benton.
Thank you. I think this might be my last question. Your retention rate and listening to what you've had to say, it sounds a lot like that you're having the same problems that education's having right now, keeping people in the class, education, keeping people in the classroom. Question about your caseworkers. How many of those are assigned to handle eligibility?
Handle eligibility?
Handle, yes.
Do you have that?
We have about 2,100 frontline eligibility workers.
2,100 frontline eligibility workers, so that would be in our Office of Family Independence. That's separate and apart, of course, from our child welfare workers.
Okay.
Representative Oliver? No, Representative Taylor. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just following up on the kinship thing. If you were working with, what would be the fiscal impact of locating and working with relatives out of state for placements? Do you guys do that at all? And what is the process, I guess?
We absolutely do look for relatives both in state and out of state. By state and federal law, we're required to make our best attempts to locate relatives as close as possible to the point of removal so that the child doesn't have to change schools. We work through a process called the Interstate Compact for Placement of Children, and basically what happens there is that we have a national body that is a clearinghouse for the kind of background checks that have to be done when children are placed in homes. So we would make a request, for instance, if the family was in North Carolina, through that clearinghouse, they would pass that to the state of North Carolina. The county office would do that work, pass it back through the same channels. And so it is a very long process, a very cumbersome process, and it's difficult, without a doubt. I think very necessary, but we've also been working with neighboring states where we most often place children, and we most often place children in border counties. And so at this point in time, we've worked out agreements with both Alabama and the state of Tennessee and North Carolina to have a mechanism to speed that process. If they're in bordering counties, you have a family that lives in one town and just across the state line's grandmother, we have established agreements that are in concert with the Interstate Compact that allows us to do that more quickly. But we do not allow the difficulty of the process to deter us from trying to place with family at this point.
Thank you.
Well, you obviously have a lot of advocates in this room.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate all the help that we've been given by the legislature. This is a process that is going to be long, but if we continue to put the kind of resources toward it that are necessary, I'm convinced that we'll get this right. And I'll do my very best to assure that any money that's given to us is used in the way that is most effective and most cost effective for the citizens of the state.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh-oh. We should have quit. Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One more quick question. Is, in the big scheme of things, especially when we're talking about children, is there anything more important than having the caseworker in the field? If we find money, is there anything that we should look at before we give it to get you more people out there?
That's a part of the decision that I had to make in conjunction with the governor's office this year. We talked a whole lot about the turnover issues because that is so important. In my estimation, a key part of the turnover is high caseloads. Having been a caseworker myself, I can tell you that when I had a caseload of 15 to 20 cases, I could do that and feel pretty effective at it. When I got into the 25 caseload range, I would go home at night and I couldn't sleep. I'd lay there looking at the ceiling thinking to myself, I didn't get to see this child or this child, and I wonder if they're going to be okay until I see them again. That kind of thing wears you completely out. It takes a toll on you physically and mentally. And so my decision or my recommendation to the governor was to go ahead and fund additional caseworkers and let us look in the future at working on salaries and other type of things that play into turnover, because I do believe that that's one of the key factors in turnover as well.
Thank you.
Director, one of my favorite sayings, and you've heard me say this many times, when a BSW goes up to a trailer and knocks on the door, and the person comes to the door and the BSW says, I want to help you, isn't it true that the BSW is making the same amount of money that qualifies them for the same benefits that the people they're asking how they can help them? Is that not true?
In many cases, that is true.
It's sad, because tell them what the amount is. Even though we did the pay scale, what is the amount for a BSW and an MSW?
And BSW is $28,000 a year, $32,000 for an MSW. Let me check that. Is that 32 or 34?
It's about 32 starting.
32 starting.
32,000 for an MSW, and I don't know what a teacher's beginning salary is, but you know, there's obviously not level playing fields around. That's my famous saying. I'm going to stick to it, too. All right. I don't see any more questions. You get down before we get some more.
Thank you.
We sure do appreciate y'all coming. Commissioner, we appreciate your work. Did you have anything you wanted to add to close out?
I could call your attention to 2 items related to departmental administration.
Good. Thank you.
Certainly. These are also, and I apologize, we thought everyone would have the tracking document, but we'll make sure when we present next time that we have it on the screen as well. This is page 40 of 75 in the tracking document, and it is line 28.8 related to departmental administration. The first item is an increase of $52,551, and that is an increase related to teamwork that several others have mentioned earlier today. The other item is line 28.8.2, and those are funds for the integrated eligibility system for its transfer and continuation, and that is just over 1.3 million that in the amended. And those are the only 2 items that we have.
Is there any questions to close out with the commissioner? Representative Benton, you don't have a question? Nope. We're really sincere. We all, people would not be here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon talking about children in your department. You really have a congregation of advocates here and people that are sitting in the audience, and we're so proud to be with you in this reformation and working with you. And if you'll get me those numbers for 17, we'll be glad to look at them and appreciate it.
Thank you.
So with that, thank you very much for coming. So we're going to close out today. DBHDD is not testifying. The Office of Child Advocate didn't have any changes. So with that, we're going to close out the hearings today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.